Hey there and welcome back to Rimworld. My name is Pete and today we complete another episode of our Rimworld Ice Sheet Survival series. After celebrating the series' 1-year anniversary in the last episode, we are nearing the end of winter in this one, and of course, as always, we have big plans. Our latest colony member Antonio has settled in nicely and can now begin his day with a bit of field work after we lost a sizable portion of our potatoes in the last episode due to a blight. By the way, I have seen a few comments mentioning that we now have an inevitable infestation waiting to happen in the greenhouse because we have properly dug underneath the mountain. However, due to the relatively small size of the mountain we dug into, none of the tiles inside of our greenhouse are actually overhead mountain. They all only have a thin rock roof, and that will be enough to prevent any infestations from spawning regardless of temperature. I admit though that this was not necessarily planned, but it is definitely a very lucky coincidence. Now we'll stick with Antonio for a while longer here as he now makes his way out onto the ice sheet. Over the course of the last few episodes, steel is becoming more and more of a bottleneck resource for us, as all steel slag chunks in close vicinity of our base have been hauled and processed, and we also no longer have any naturally occurring steel veins close by. However, steel is one of those resources that plays a vital role from the very first moment of a playthrough up until the very end, and so we'll now have Antonio deconstruct some ship chunks in order to obtain more. As always, he takes care of the sensitive components, while the actual steel hauling will then be a job for our huskies. Back in the base meanwhile, we have Cambia still researching the Johnson Tanaka drive, the fifth and final research project for our spaceship. Once it is completed, we could technically build a spaceship, escape the planet and end the series. However, mainly due to the large number of advanced components required for that, it will still take a while until we actually get to that point. Our very first event of the episode are then some cargo pods, and inside we find a bit of food. 80 unfertilized chicken eggs are waiting to be hauled back now, and of course that is nothing our huskies can't handle. With nighttime setting across the ice sheet, Cobra is then awake again, and he now continues to increase our steel supplies with the smelter. Just a short while later then, it is time for the first husky birth of the episode, as we can see Ruby here with a single male puppy. And I think we are past the point where we desperately need to slaughter every new puppy we obtain, so we'll give this one a name, and of course I went to the Patreon naming rights tier for that, and the name that was randomly selected was Burns from Patreon Master Burns. And we'll see how long Burns remains with us. Selling would currently be my preferred option, but we have a good amount of food at the moment, so we're not in a hurry. Speaking of food, with the smelting taken care of, we will now also make things a bit easier for the huskies in that regard, as we haul them a few human corpses right into their stables. This is what they've been feeding on for a while now, and with potatoes and rice being turned into Chemfuel instead of pemmican, that will likely also not change anytime soon, so we might as well make feeding a bit easier. And now I think it's time to take care of the first mission in this episode. Looking at the world map, we have a few to choose from. However, in my opinion, the clear no-brainer choice is the prisoner camp right next to our base. Since there is only one enemy guarding the place, we will also only send one of our own. I think the turrets are not that big of an issue, and we should be able to outmaneuver them. So since Antonio and Cambia are still asleep, we'll send Cobra, and apart from his assault rifle, he'll bring with him a few fine meals, some medicine, and a bedroll for resting. Now, despite the meals in his inventory, it says here that we don't have enough food for the trip, but we'll simply ignore that for now and send Cobra on his way, because we can also quickly fix it by allowing Cobra to actually eat the fine meals that he has brought with him. And I know there is a way to mass-produce nutrient-paste meals, but then again I don't think this is necessarily an intended mechanic in the game, so we'll have to bring other supplies. On the world map we can see Cobra is now on his way, while Antonio has begun the next project. The entire floor of the Ancient Danger was covered in slate tiles, and since we don't really use the place, we might as well remove them and maybe use them in building or crafting projects of our own. At this point we also have the next event, and it is a Psychic Soothe, so at least Cambia and Antonio, who have remained home, will receive a nice mood bonus. And things inside of the Ancient Danger get even better because some of the tiles here are made of concrete. And those tiles drop 5 units of steel each when deconstructed, which should definitely benefit our slowly growing supply. And as the day then comes to a close, the room is already more than halfway cleared, and with Cambia and Antonio ready to go off to bed, we can jump back over to Cobra, who has just arrived at the prisoner camp. And things are certainly looking manageable here. The prison itself is protected by 2 turrets in the north and south, however only one of them actually works because the other one is hooked up directly to a solar panel. So this makes the south side a very good point of attack. Our enemy, meanwhile, is equipped with an incendiary launcher, which is thankfully not that powerful of a weapon. Yes, it has a bit of an area of effect and can start dangerous fires, but the actual damage it does is fairly low, and paired up with a shooting skill of 0 and the trigger-happy trait, I certainly like Cobra's chances in this fight. However, before we engage, let us also have a quick look at the prisoner, because if we really don't like what we see, we could still turn around. However, I am actually somewhat intrigued here. While cooking and medicine are certainly not skills that we use too often these days, having a good doctor on hand could pave the way for some of the more complicated operations, such as removing organs or installing bionic body parts. All in all, I think it's worth to at least bring her back to the colony, provided of course she's about to survive everything that happens next. As you can see, with her current outfit, she is not at all prepared for the cold temperatures outside, so I'd say we want to do this at least somewhat swiftly. That is, by the way, also the reason why we're not simply waiting things out here, which is in fact something that we could do. Not only would that one single turret eventually lose power from the battery, but the one enemy we have against us is also not too well protected against the cold. So if we didn't have a prisoner to rescue, I would actually think about having Cobra set up camp somewhere near the outskirts of the map, where we could simply wait for the camp to clear itself. Since we do have a prisoner to rescue though, that is unfortunately not an option. However, by not staying behind the sandbags, our enemy made it fairly easy for us here, and the superior range of the assault rifle already allowed us to land a few hits. Now though, it's time to switch over to run-and-gun tactics, not only to escape the projectiles of the incendiary launcher, but also to gain a more advantageous position where our line of fire is ideally not blocked by cover. Keeping Cobra out of cover entirely is risky, yes, but then again the incendiary launcher is not too accurate to begin with, and its shooter certainly does not help the case. The wall to the south of the base here then actually does provide excellent cover for us, and we can even use it to lure our enemy into a bit of a trap. He has suffered quite a few injuries and can't hit us behind the wall, so we definitely have time on our side now, which is why we can simply let him come to us. And in that scenario, the fast-firing assault rifle will almost always get the upper hand, and the result is no different here, as our enemy falls and the camp is more or less cleared. Before he bleeds out, we quickly want to strip him of his parka though, that way our rescued prisoner will be able to wear it in a moment and will not have to cope with wearing dead man's apparel. Now, strictly speaking, the outpost here is not cleared yet because we still have one turret up and running. And that turret is still hostile towards us despite no more enemies being present, so instead of taking the door into the prison, we'll simply dig our way in. And now we can free our prisoner, and with that our small faction once again grows. Equipping the parka is then of course the first thing we'll do with her, before we once again have a look at the list of patrons and pick a new name. And I actually really like how this one turned out, as our latest colony member will be named Giraffe, after the patron This Is Giraffe. Unfortunately though, Giraffe is already experiencing serious hypothermia, and she is also already in the process of developing frostbite, so getting her a bit more protected against the elements is our first priority here. Cobra meanwhile is taking a much needed nap, and so taking out that last turret now falls to Giraffe herself. However, engaging a turret one-on-one can be very dangerous, so the main challenge here is to be able to damage it without being damaged in return. And this is where the incendiary launcher becomes a very useful tool. Since the turret is hooked up to a battery, we don't necessarily need to destroy the turret itself to deactivate it. Instead, simply getting rid of the battery will work just as well, and that can be achieved while staying out of the turret's line of fire. Our goal here is to fire the incendiary launcher until the battery catches fire, and once that has happened, we can step away and let the flames do the rest of the work. And here we are, a small spark has jumped over to the battery, and that will be enough to eventually destroy the thing. So we can now spend a few moments to have Giraffe heal herself, while we wait for this very last danger of the map to disappear. And that's it, the battery is destroyed and the turret has lost power, and with that all enemies on the map are officially defeated, and only now can we reassemble our caravan and return to the base. However, we will not leave without a few precious goods. Of course, there is a bit of food that we will take with us, but we have 2 colonists here and they can carry a bit more than that, so we will have Cobra deconstruct the solar panel here for some precious steel. And yes, I know some components would probably be a bit more valuable, but contrary to steel, we have plenty of those already. So, time to assemble the caravan again and get Cobra and Giraffe moving back home. As I mentioned, we will take all of the food as well as the beer, and then we'll fill up the rest of their carrying capacity with steel. And that's it, the 2 of them will get moving immediately and should be back home in just over a day. Meanwhile, in our small mountain base a new day has begun, and with a 4th colonist soon joining us, it's time to dig out some new quarters. And we won't do anything out of the ordinary here. Giraffe will get the exact same bedroom as the other 3 colonists, and a single day should be more than enough time to get that properly constructed. However, because Antonio can't do all of the work himself, Cambia will help a bit, especially the floor smoothing is a lengthy process, and we're also not in a desperate hurry with Cambia's research project. Night falls and also passes again, and we skip ahead to the next morning, where Giraffe is fully healed of her frostbite injuries, and Antonio and Cambia are already busy constructing some furniture. A short while later, most of it is in place, including an excellent quality plasteel bed, which will not only boost the beauty stat of the room, but also provide Giraffe with an extremely comfortable place to rest. The remainder of the room is then quickly finished as well, and just as the psychic soothe comes to an end, so does the work for Cambia and Antonio. And while Cambia returns to the research bench, Antonio can now already bring in his very first potato harvest. Admittedly, only half of the plants have fully matured yet, but with every crop yielding 11 potatoes, that should still be plenty. While Antonio is sowing out new seeds, the other half of the colony then arrives back home, and thankfully both of them arrive healthy and with their mood largely intact. And just in that moment, maybe to celebrate the return, Cambia is throwing a party, the very first party ever out here on the ice sheet, but I think our colonists deserve it. Attending the party will boost everyone's mood, by the way, and the bonus from that will last for quite a while, so even though it involves all 4 of our colonists, it's by no means a waste of time. And while we're at it, we might as well quickly put a party spot down, just to make sure all future parties also happen in the same location. In the evening then, the party comes to an end and everyone leaves just a tiny bit happier, and for all intents and purposes, I would say life is pretty good out on the ice sheet, at least for the moment. On the next morning then, our colonists are all once again getting busy. Cambia is researching, Cobra is removing a few more floor tiles, and Giraffe, well, she's putting her artistic skills to good use. After all, everyone else has a sculpture in their room, so she can make herself one as well. Also, art is one of the 3 skills that she's passionate about. It is not necessarily her strong suit yet, but with a bit of practice she should be able to improve quickly. Now, as you might have noticed already, we have successfully survived another winter and are now officially in spring. That means temperatures will rise again, we can turn off the heater in the husky stables, and we should hopefully also see a few occasional visitors. In the afternoon then, the Ancient Danger has successfully been stripped of all resources. The only thing still remaining is a single cryptosleep casket, but you never know when that might come in handy, so for the moment we'll leave it there just as an emergency backup. Now, as you know, the first potato harvest has been brought in, and I think at this point it's time we focus a bit more on our Chemfuel production. If we want to use our drop pods effectively, we will need quite a bit of Chemfuel, and not only to get where we want to go, but also to make the return trip. Steel and components to craft new pod launchers are generally not that hard to find wherever you land. Chemfuel, on the other hand, is a lot harder to come by, and should therefore be brought with, unless of course you plan for your colonists to make the return trip on foot. Now, what does all of this have to do with what's going on at the moment? Well, first of all, our small Chemfuel production room does not really have a lot of storage space. However, to avoid unnecessary hauling, we want to have at least a small stockpile here, where our colonists can store some potatoes, ideally directly after they have been harvested. That should make the Chemfuel production process a bit more efficient, and as you know, in Rimworld that is pretty much always what it's all about. And while work is still going on, we also have another husky birth to announce. This time it's Gork, who also has one single offspring, and honestly, Terra is a pretty good name already. However, the name of patron Spare Goblin produced an equally great one, as Goblin now becomes the latest addition to our husky population. A few hours later then, we have turned almost all available organic material into Chemfuel, and shortly after, the new stockpile area is also smoothed out. In the meantime, Giraffe has finished her first small sculpture, and even though it's only of poor quality, it will still provide a small beauty bonus for her room. If you're wondering, by the way, why she's working this late at night, just like Cobra, Giraffe has the night owl trait, and I think this actually works out quite nicely, with the two halves of her colony's population always taking turns. Now, Cobra has also made one last batch of Chemfuel, however, our Chemfuel related work is far from done. Now, I have been thinking and looking at the numbers for a while, and it is absolutely possible to kind of upscale our hydroponics farm by a sizable amount. In the end, the products of the hydroponics farms, so the potatoes and later on maybe also some rice, those can, as we all know, be turned into Chemfuel, which can then in turn be used to power the hydroponics farm. And this is exactly the type of energy circle I'm trying to build, because a large and efficient hydroponics farm will almost always be able to produce more food than is actually necessary to power itself. In other words, such a hydroponics farm would be able to keep itself running almost indefinitely, while at the same time even producing some surplus food, which we could use for cooking, or to turn it into even more Chemfuel if, for example, we want to use our drop pots frequently. More on that in due time. For now, we have the third and final husky birth of the episode to report. This time it is Madeline who gave birth to another male puppy, whose name will now be Cody after patron Cody Stinnett. Now back to our business in the hydroponics farm. As you can see, we have been digging out another small room underneath the mountain, but once again, very importantly, not a single of the tiles here is actually classified as overhead mountain. And this room that we're currently in the process of smoothing, that is where we will put down 3 Chemfuel generators. They will of course all be connected to the hydroponics farm, and in total with the one we already have plus the geothermal generator, we will then be able to produce a steady power output of 7,600 watts. And that is not counting the wind turbines or solar panels at all at this point. This is power that we will all produce regardless of wind or sunlight. And even the biggest possible hydroponics farm that we could build with a single sun lamp would only consume about 4,500 watts, while its produce output is more than enough to keep all those generators running. However, as you all know by now, things can't go smooth forever, and so for completing our small generator room, Randy Random rewards us with a volcanic winter. And out on the ice sheet, this is something that could hurt us severely. Not necessarily because we won't have any sunlight, after all we have grown quite accustomed to the dark, but more so because it brings with it an additional drop in temperatures. At the moment, that -60, -65 degrees Celsius threshold, that is about what we can comfortably resist. Everything below will be a bit of a problem. Now thankfully the volcanic winter is not stacking on top of the ice sheet winter, still it will likely make for a very chilly spring, and if temperatures drop too much we will have to adjust accordingly. However, for the moment we will simply continue where we left off, and that is by fueling our 3 newly constructed generators. We will also now deconstruct our 2 remaining solar panels. They are not working for half of the year anyway, and I think especially the steel can be used more effectively elsewhere. For example, in the construction of a few brand new hydroponics basins. Now, thanks to our slightly smaller steel reserves, we will not be able to immediately double the hydroponics farm in size, but for the moment we have enough to construct at least a few additional basins. And in those new basins we will also no longer plant potatoes, but instead will go back to rice, not because I don't like the potatoes, that other half of the farm will remain completely untouched, but I simply like the flexibility that rice gives us, and with 4 colonists now occupying the base, I think we have enough capable workers to take care of the farm. And so, with our small ice sheet base covered by a volcanic winter, but also with a slowly growing hydroponics farm and much more importantly also with a 4th colonist, that is how we will wrap up today's episode. We also have husky puppy Cody apparently hammered on beer, and what better way would there be to make the cut? Next time we'll then see about sending out some of those drop pods, provided of course we can quickly produce enough Chemfuel. And yes, I know 4 Chemfuel generators are way too much at the moment, but just a few moments after the footage ends here I have actually turned 2 of them back off again, but at least we have them fueled already. So in the next episode, we will then continue right here where we left off today. In the meantime, if you enjoyed this episode, then I would of course be happy if you could leave a thumbs up. And if you want to support the channel further, then you can either subscribe if you haven't already, or you can also support the Pete Complete Patreon. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.